everybody. Welcome to Pub Theology. We're so excited that you are spending your Wednesday night or whenever you are watching this video with us. We have a really important night tonight. It's in our Badass Women of San Antonio series, and tonight's topic is something that is always an issue, and I think the more we learn and grow, the more we realize that historically this is one of society's kind of enduring issues. And it's one of the many issues that has actually become worse during the pandemic, and that is domestic violence. And so tonight we have 3 badass women of San Antonio who are all working to end domestic violence in San Antonio, and they're working at it from different angles. And I think that for something as multifaceted and pernicious as domestic violence, it's an honor to have people from different sectors to learn what the different approaches will look like. And so I'm excited that you're here to learn from them. Thank you for joining us. Those of you who join us regularly, it's really an honor that people, now that you have the whole world of content to choose from, that you're spending time with us. I encourage you to grab a local brew. We are still Pub Theology, and so we want to preserve that spirit of a pub chat where you're gathered and the drinks are flowing and you venture from casual chit chat into the real stuff. And that's what we are going to do here tonight with our guests. So I'm going to go ahead and bring them up and allow them to introduce themselves, just like we would if we were at the friendly spot, which we can't wait to get back to one of these days when all the good social distancing and mask wearing that everyone needs to be doing takes effect. All right, I'm going to let Judge Monique Diaz start, and then we will go ahead and move around.
Thank you so much for having me. I am honored to be here. I miss the old Pub Theology days, but we'll get back there soon, I know. My name is Judge Monique Diaz. I preside over the 150th Civil District Court here in Bexar County. We do a little bit of everything, a lot of family law, and we deal with a lot of domestic violence cases on the civil side. When I'm not on the bench, I am the proud co-chair of our local Collaborative Commission on Domestic Violence, which was created about 1.5 years ago, which we'll talk a little bit more about today. But it's a group that's talking about how we can address domestic violence locally, coming together as a community. And I'm excited to talk about some of the work that we've been doing. Thanks for the opportunity.
We're so happy you're here. And Dr. Gonzalez.
Hi, I'm Dr. Stacey Speedlin Gonzalez. I'm an assistant professor in practice at the University of Texas at San Antonio. I also have a small private practice here in Bexar County, which primarily sees individuals with severe mental health and substance use disorders. My role with domestic violence has been multifaceted. I'll certainly talk a little bit more about that when we get further on, and I want to thank you for having me on the show.
We're so happy y'all are here. And we also have Patricia Castillo. She's having some technical difficulties, I think. And as soon as we get those worked out, we'll stop the conversation and bring her in. Will you ladies just start by telling me where the San Antonio, Bexar County, where do we fit in the, how big of an issue is this here? Is it worse than other places? Do we do better than other places at certain things? How big of an emergency issue is this for us?
Well, I'll start, Doctor, if you don't mind. Domestic violence is a big issue in Bexar County, but it is unfortunately not something that is unique to Bexar County. Domestic violence is an issue across the state, across the United States, and across the world. It's been declared essentially the shadow pandemic within COVID. It is a real problem, and unfortunately, in Bexar County, we have had relatively higher than other similarly situated counties' numbers, though. And when we're talking about numbers, it's really hard to get a true grasp of what the state of domestic violence is, because so much of it happens behind closed doors. So many people don't come out, or if they do, there may not be police reports to reflect that. There's so much complexity to it and problems with the data around it that sadly one of the main things we look at is the amount of people that are murdered as a result of domestic violence. And that's kind of one of the greatest indicators. So in Bexar County in 2018, unfortunately, we had the highest rate of domestic violence murders committed by men against women in the state of Texas. And that was one of the reasons that one of the impetuses for the Collaborative Commission on Domestic Violence forming about 1.5 years ago as well.
That's really grim. Dr. Gonzalez, would you tell us from your point of view what you're seeing as far as where and how our county is situated?
Thank you. I'm going to agree a lot with what Judge Diaz is saying. Two things that she stated that I'll also reiterate, which is that Bexar County is considered at present time the deadliest county for women. In fact, specifically, our zip code 78207 is the most dangerous zip code for women in the entire state of Texas. And when you look at us nationwide, we are in the top 10 regarding intimate partner homicides. And yes, it is very challenging to quantify these numbers because there are several factors that come into play that impede one's ability to capture that data. One, Judge Diaz mentioned already, which is the fact that it's the most underreported crime. And really, when we look at some of the current gaps in our services, some of the current challenges with respect to responding to domestic violence as a community, we have people that are more apprehensive of actually reporting because they become disillusioned with our system. The other thing that makes it challenging is the fact that when we look at the actual definition of domestic violence, it does not encompass all forms of domestic violence. It primarily uses a definition that deals with physical or sexual violence. So domestic violence, if we broaden that terminology, has a greater impact on people, especially when we're looking at the psychological ramifications that one must endure, and how that impacts individuals in terms of health, in terms of mental health, in terms of how people are addressing these issues, whether they're willing to engage in help seeking. That at a larger scale is also impacting our community, especially during the pandemic when people are not well, when there's limited access to these resources and services, how this is affecting our communities at a micro level, but also at our macro levels.
Two big questions that just jumped out at me from what you guys have both said. One, on the reporting, I think that one of the things, and as a member of the media, I realize that we are largely at fault in some of this, is that when you look at both child abuse and domestic violence, partner violence, when you see numbers going up, a lot of times there's an assumption that things are getting worse. And if the numbers are going down, then things are getting better. When a lot of folks were saying that because of the pandemic, like schools aren't going to be able to catch as much as they would have, or friend groups, the seeing people is how a lot of this stuff gets identified. And, the pressure to report is higher if you know that your boss saw the bruise or whatever. And so I'm wondering, how should we as the general population, what should we be looking for in the numbers in these next few months as, as reports start coming out about what was the situation, what was the domestic violence impact of COVID? What are you expecting to see in the numbers? And then the second thing, actually, let's just start with that, and then we'll move to the next thing, because that's a pretty substantial question.
Well, I'm sure Dr. Gonzalez will get a little bit deeper into this analysis, but I do know that at least generally what we see is in times of natural disasters, we see domestic violence increase. That is something we've seen historically. There's evidence of that. It's been studied, for example, with the hurricanes that we've seen. I think with Hurricane Katrina and Harvey, it was between like 9 and 12% increase. We're seeing in some other nations that have been studying this as well, a severe increase. I think France, I want to say it was a 20% increase in domestic violence. So we see it happening. We know it's happening. But the data right now is, in my opinion, we need a little bit better data, at least locally, to really get an idea of the actual impact that this is going to have on us. But I think the consensus is we believe it is increasing because of COVID, not only for the reasons that you mentioned, Bekah, because you're correct that now it makes it harder to identify, maybe a little more challenging to speak out, to reach out. But on top of that, just by the fact that we are really spending a lot of time at home, and we had these stay-at-home orders for a while that required us to stay at home. Many victims were being required to, and still to this day, are stuck at home with their abusers. And finding it more challenging to reach out, and that domestic violence is not going away. We know that that stressors such as lack of financial resources, lack of employment, lack of social support can increase domestic violence. So all of that stacked on top of each other, unfortunately, the expectation is that we're going to likely see the numbers increase. And here in Bexar County, as of August of this year, we already had more domestic violence homicides than we did in all of last year. So we know it's a problem. One of the things that the Collaborative Commission on Domestic Violence, through the partners that we have, has tried to do is pool our resources to get information out to the community on different ways that you can be helped during this time. For example, as simple as letting people know that you can text 911. If you can't pick up the phone and call, you can actually send a text message to 911 if you're in a position of need. And a lot of our local resources and our social services have transitioned as best as they can, and I think they're doing a great job of providing as much services as they can remotely, in combination with in-person. So there's a lot of modifications that have been made to adjust and try to reach these populations, these families, because we're really talking about families here. We're talking about when a victim is abused, the perpetrator needs as much help as the victim needs, as much help as the children in those families need, if we really want to stop these cycles of abuse. So I think we're doing a fairly good job as a community, but we're still going to see those numbers, I think, not going the direction that we want them to go.
Stacey, do you want to offer something as well? I think that is just a lot to hear, as we each think about how challenging the pandemic has been in our own situations, to then add all of that into a situation where someone would be in an abusive situation and truly trapped. And I've done a lot of immigration reporting where women who are immigrants, who do not have legal status, often get trapped in these situations. And it's a layer of desperation and a layer of stress that I think adds to things. I think it's interesting that you mentioned the stressors that go into increasing it, because it doesn't seem to be something that exists on its own. It always seems to be this like magnifier on top of other really tough situations. And the fact that, Stacey, you mentioned that 78207 was a zip code where it was particularly prevalent. We know that there's a lot of other historically driven systemic issues that have piled on top of that area, and really kind of oppressed people there. And would you talk a little bit about how that all comes together and kind of feeds into the domestic violence problem?
Sure. I can definitely talk specifically about 78207, which is actually where my university is located. And there are certainly unique factors that come into play with that particular zip code. But you also mentioned child abuse. And I will say that District 8, which is identified as by CPS as San Antonio, has a large problem with child abuse. I think we're number 3 in the state of Texas. And the reason I mentioned child abuse along with 78207 zip code and domestic violence is the conversation that we don't have enough with respect to domestic violence. And that is that there is a certain perspective or mindset that comes into play that normalizes child abuse and domestic violence in Bexar County. And that's a discussion we have to have more frequently. I do love the fact that we are talking about the numbers. And even more so, I love the fact that the Collaborative Commission has come together to put into place an action plan. Because with all of these numbers and with all of these conversations, it's so important that we put together an action plan. Domestic violence has increased exponentially as a result of the pandemic. And yes, there are certain zip codes that are more vulnerable to domestic violence, especially IPH. But domestic violence, as mentioned earlier, is an ongoing, persistent problem that cascades across communities and across countries. The fact that there are vulnerable people that are not safe in their own home because we have normalized this idea that it's somehow wrong to leave your marriage. That God doesn't want you to leave your marriage, or it makes you a failure if you divorce. We've made it to where it costs so much money for someone to leave, and they may have to risk leaving their children behind. The fact that we're not addressing the challenges that exist with the perpetrators. So even when the victim leaves, that perpetrator finds another victim. And so there are so many multifaceted issues that really require more discussion on how we as a community can come together and develop these plans of action. And yes, I think there is money involved, and I think there's a lot of policy changes that need to be done, but it exists really with changing the conversation. And if I'm going to talk about that zip code, and I'm going to talk about San Antonio and why we're a vulnerable community, we have to talk about why domestic violence is normalized here. And
Let's
why
talk about
people...
that. I want
Yes,
to hear all your thoughts on that, because I think that what you said about don't leave your marriage, or that staying together is always the best option, is definitely, you hear that in the discourse about, oh, well, we were looking at single parent homes as an indicator of poor performance for in schools or something like that. And you never talk about who among those single parent homes, there's an inherent assumption that they made the worst of 2 choices, when really they might have made the better of 2 choices, but that would make it really hard if you felt like everything I've heard is that being by myself with my kids will be worse off for them. And so talk to me about, it's coming from the church, and it's coming from the way we talk about these things, and when we talk about statistics as well. So tell me about, what can we do to change that discourse? What do people need to hear?
Do you want me to start, or would you like to hear from Judge Diaz first?
Both of you, whoever wants to go first. And also, I apologize for the delay on my video. It's going to look like I'm just talking over y'all. We can't figure out what's going on, but just ignore my flailing arms long after I've stopped talking up there.
After you, doctor, please.
So historically, domestic violence was not recognized as a legal problem. It wasn't until the late 60s or the early 70s that the court system even felt like it was their place to get involved in a marriage, to assist someone with separating from their marriage. And it took time after that before they even determined that domestic violence was a criminal act. So we're not talking about something that has always been recognized as a public problem the way we recognize it today. It was actually the battered women's shelters, the feminist movement, and several other movements in our history that shaped and molded the policies that we have today. And I say that, but we also know that VAWA lapsed recently under the current administration. They did not see it as a valuable policy that needed to remain in place. And yet VAWA is one of the best protections we have for domestic violence victims across the country.
And that's the Violence Against Women Act?
That's correct.
Okay, just making...
Yes.
For those who were going, VAWA.
Yes, yes. So they provide federal dollars to allocate towards a lot of the services that we receive. That includes the battered women's shelters across the country. It includes the battered women's hotline. So all of the services across the country rest under such a policy, and federal dollars are allocated to support some of the services that we so desperately need. Yet with the increasing numbers and the increasing needs, of course, we need more services involved with that. So as we started changing the conversation around domestic violence, there are still a lot of myths in place that people still believe. Number one, the fact that it takes a woman on average 8 times to leave before she can finally, or he, if it's a man that's being battered, can finally leave the marriage. There are myths in place that the individual must want attention, that it's not that bad, that they don't really want to go. We shame the victim. We tell the victim it's their fault because they continue to stay, but people don't understand how complicated it is to leave. We know that 2/3 of protective orders are violated. So when a person leaves and files that protective order, it does not mean they're safe. It actually puts their life in a much greater danger. There's a constant discussion. In fact, there is another bill that's been filed by the Texas Council of Family Violence for the 87th legislative session regarding firearms. And I know here in Texas, we don't like to talk about firearms, but 300% of the murders that took place had a firearm, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that stat. When a firearm is in the home where there is domestic violence, the likelihood that they will be murdered goes up 300%. So we know that firearms and strangulation are still the #1 cause of death when it involves intimate partner homicide. And yet we are not setting policies in place that can change all of that because it is still very politicized. And we are still really bringing home a message that these victims do not matter. I think we lost her, but Judge Diaz, I'm sure you probably have a lot to add to this.
We can just chat, Doctor, between the two of us.
Yeah.
I'm sure she'll come back soon. Hopefully we can get Patricia back with us as well.
Yeah.
But just to kind of add to that, there was so many great points that you made in that response, Doctor. And some of the things that we're doing, just really briefly to discuss through the commission, and we're here today talking in pub theology and talking about the role that our faith-based community has and the tremendous power that folks within our faith-based community have by virtue of having so many folks come before them in their congregations, whether it be virtual or in person. And these are people that will really listen to a message that can be channeled through their faith-based institutions. So within the commission, we started off with 5 committees, and we added on to that, and we're continuing to add on. And one of those is a faith-based committee for this very purpose. And we'd love to, if anyone is listening that's interested in joining that to help kind of break the stigma within religious institutions of talking about domestic violence and providing more resources and options. Please come and join us, reach out to us. We'd love to have you. And I'm getting a little feedback. I'm going to try to lower my volume a little bit right there. And then the other thing I wanted to touch on that you mentioned, Doctor, is the issue of protective orders as well, and how we can better address protective orders, how we can really better serve these families. Because you are absolutely right that if you're only solving one part of the equation, we're not going to stop the generational cycles of abuse. If you don't get both the victim help and the perpetrator the help that they need, the perpetrator could continue to perpetrate, the victim could continue to fall victim to domestic violence. And then the, even sadder part about that is when there are children involved, which there often are. What we see is that those children, we all learn from our parents. We learn from what we see and what we're around. And those children are more likely to fall into cycles of abuse on both sides, as victims and as perpetrators. So when we're talking about getting protective orders for individuals, yes, that certainly can help deter, and I recommend that people try to obtain them. If you feel that you're in danger, but within the context of a protective order, the law has developed to now even allow for provisions of child support and provisions of visitation, possession, and access to be obtained at the same time you're getting a protective order. Because what that does is now in those positions, a victim will have the protective order, but they also will have child support to help them get on their feet, to feed and support their families. And one of the causes that we see of domestic violence, often on the civil side, is a lack of clear terms for visitation. And that often creates conflict when you're sharing custody of children. You don't have clarity on who is to have access of the children when and where you exchange them. Really, that doesn't set a family up to break that generational cycle. It doesn't set a victim up to succeed if you're not providing all of that at the same time. And I wish we had all of the resources in the world to provide all of the help that we really need for these families. But I think as a community, we're doing as great of a job as we can to catch up to speed, to identify those gaps and to figure out what are the evidence-based strategies that we can utilize to really make long-term change in our community. So you made so many great points, Doctor, that I just wanted to elaborate on a couple of those.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I also wanted to mention, I know it's just you and I right now, but I wanted to give a shout out also to Dr. Rosie Speedlin Gonzalez, and my colleague, Judge Speedlin Gonzalez, excuse me, who's doing great work on the criminal side with her domestic violence court and Judge Michael Dello, and they have these specialty courts over there. Which we've seen really, those types of courts really do have an impact in that they have one judge that can hear the case from beginning to end, that really has the training on domestic violence, that can create a more specialized order to hopefully create a really big impact. And just, I want to brag on her a little bit. She created one of the first pilot programs for how to get firearms out of the possession of the defendants in her courtroom. And we've been growing that through the commission, actually, to try to expand that program so that judges across Bexar County can utilize a similar program to make sure that we're getting firearms out of the hands of offenders who are already, under the law, not authorized to possess them.
Right. Yes.
So we've really been grateful for her leadership on that and working with her on that.
Thank you for mentioning that. And I'll definitely let the judge know that you said that. And she thinks very highly of the work that you're doing in your court. I serve on the Texas Council of Family Violence. I'm on their public policy committee. And one more time, we are trying to put that bill before the 87th legislative session to make it consistent across the entire state, because those orders are just not being implemented for reasons that I'm sure you're all too familiar with. But I love the fact that the commission is working to increase that, at least here in Bexar County, where our problems are so persistent. One of the things that Judge Rosie and I had the privilege of doing together that I'm sure you know about, and since there are people watching that we can't see, I'll mention, is that Judge Rosie and I actually filed a bill on the 86th legislative session titled House Bill 3529, which is what developed the first pilot domestic violence program here in Bexar County under the drug court. And we're very proud of that. We finally have it up and running. We have several participants. And what that affords these offenders is increased accountability and the ability to get sober and clean, where drugs and alcohol played a significant role in the actual domestic violence. And at the misdemeanor level, we're seeing some positive success thus far. I know it's definitely more challenging in your court, Judge Diaz, because you've got definitely people who have repeated their offenses or are engaging in a lot more risky behavior. So at the misdemeanor level, we're hoping that we can really pilot something that can potentially become an evidence-based practice under the drug court model for the country. We're hoping to really pilot that, potentially pilot it for the state of Texas. So.
Yes, and you guys have done great work there as well. Doctor, I'm familiar with your work on the issue, to your research. And, one of the, going back to the child abuse discussion that we were having, on the civil side, one of the things that we do for the folks that are watching that aren't familiar in the civil district courts is we handle the CPS cases and the CPS removal of children from homes for various reasons. And unfortunately, the numbers from the CPS docket are alarming in terms of how many of those cases involve domestic violence and involve drug usage. I think it's about 30% of those cases have been identified as having removals where the primary cause is domestic violence, the primary cause. So domestic violence, and 60% of those involve drug usage and domestic violence. So it is a huge problem. And what we're doing with these specialty courts is providing, the reason these specialty courts work is that you have the support staff and you have the resources and you have the training to really provide the best wraparound holistic services to families. And it's a little bit different, on the criminal side versus the civil side in terms of what we can do. But that's the concept of the specialty courts that you guys are working on, that we're working on the civil side as well. Like you said, it's something that we can have a community.
Guys, I'm so sorry. We are. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we are having technical difficulties of epic proportion over here. There's
we're having a great time. Judge and I were
having
and I was like,
they're still going. They're still going. Just let them keep going.
It's been wonderful.
And we're going to get Patricia on here as well. Anyway, so what did I miss? I'm just kidding.
Well, 10 minutes ago. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, no, y'all keep going, and we're gonna. I'm gonna pull myself off and just keep listening. Wanted y'all to know that we are back. 5 laptops and 3 phones later, we figured out a fix.
Yes,
it's amazing. But anyway, keep going with what you were saying, and we will. We will get through this. So continue on.
For any viewers that have questions, I believe we'll be able to see them broadcasted at the very bottom of the screen. So feel free to chime in if you all have questions. Wonderful, wonderful. Okay. So I'm seeing some comments. Yes. So yes, thank you. One of the things that I was going to mention, and I hope Patricia will come back on and she can talk a little bit about the work that she and I are doing. We just recently applied for a state level grant from the governor's office. And the reason why is because you mentioned about the civil side. One of the large gaps in services that we identified a little while back was really looking at the cost that is involved on the civil side with respect to separation and divorce and child custody. especially when the perpetrator has all the financial resources. They can order all kinds of things through the process of the courts that the victim cannot afford in order to gain custody of their children, in order to access bank accounts, in order to essentially get their life rebuilt. And so Patricia and I actually wrote a grant, and we just found out a month ago that it was fully funded. So we'll be able to hire an attorney that's going to serve 75 individuals here in Bexar County. And we are hiring a caseworker that's going to assist with that process as well, in terms of linking them to necessary resources. So we're really excited about that. And I think for anybody that's watching this, wanting to know, how do I get involved? I think any type of skill set that you have helps us on the firing line with what we're doing. I really am a person that exists in the background. You never see my face. I just write grants and I do those kind of things, write bills. But every skill set is needed. And when you see a gap in our services in our community, by all means, talk to people like Judge Diaz in the commission, talk to Patricia Castillo at the Peace Initiative, and let us know what your ideas are, because this is how these gaps get filled in our county, in our community. And so I just wanted to put that out there. Hi, Patricia.
Hi, everybody. Let's take this moment to meet Patricia and to hear more about what people who are in their community, I mean, tell us more, because I think that a lot of the people who watch Pub Theology are people who are not just people of faith, but people who want to feel bound to humanity, who want to say, not only, you know, am I doing my job, raising my family, but I'm connected to my community in this meaningful way, and I'm helping. And we want to make sure that that impulse has an effective way to go, and that it is joining a team, so that we don't have a bunch of heroes running around trying to reinvent the wheel, but we have great places for them to plug in. So tell us, first of all, I'd love for Patricia to just talk to us a little bit about her work, as we are just now getting to meet her, but then also segueing into, you know, talk to me about the diversity of people who can get involved in this.
Well, I'm a social worker by profession. I'm an activist by heart. I definitely see this work as a mission. I fulfill, aspects of my faith easily by doing this work. I see my role as a servant leader, and I also view myself as an instrument for God's work to happen in community. And to me, that's very important. One of the founders of the Peace Initiative were the Benedictine Sisters of Bernie. And I think that the fact that the work is rooted in spirituality, in faith, in scripture, to me is all very important, and has been something that, roots me, that grounds me, that is a foundation for the work that I do, serving my community. And so I think it's very important, that aspect of who I am and what I do. And in terms of, everyday people getting involved, one of the very first programs we created was the FACT program, and it stands for Family Assistance Crisis Teams. And we knew, Jane Schaefer and myself were the founders of the FACT program. We knew, and the Peace Initiative as well, by the way, we knew that it couldn't just be me and her, being upset, screaming and yelling, and getting after people, that it had to be the community's concern. And we created fact in that spirit that we would get the community involved in the work, and we wanted the community to play a role. And we started that program in 1990. We have put over 3,000 people, citizens, regular, everyday folks through that training program. We did the program 4 times a year, every year since 1990. And every time we did that program, that training program on domestic violence and law enforcement and that intersection, at least 15, 20, 25 people would show up. So every year we would add 100, on average, about 100 people to our volunteer. And those people were serving victims of domestic violence out of the substations in the early years. And then later on, when Chief McManus came on board, he gave us permission to get our volunteers to ride with patrol officers. And they did their volunteer stint every Friday and Saturday nights, because those are peak times for domestic violence. And they worked from 7 p.m. till 2 or 3 in the morning. And they would be out with patrol, riding with them, responding to calls for help regarding domestic violence. And to me, that was how we showed community that community cares. Community is worried about this stuff. They want to do something about it. And those volunteers showing up to our training sessions 4 times a year told us exactly that. Because before, everybody always, my impression was nobody wants to hear about this and nobody cares, and everybody just turns the other way, and that was just not true. Because these folks showed up. We have 30,000 people embedded in our community right now that have been trained in domestic violence. The other thing we found too was that they weren't just doing the work when they were out on their stint 1 time every 6 months, because that's all we ask of people, to show up 1 time every 6 months, because we had enough people to meet all the shifts, right? And they were doing, they would call us and say, hey, I helped this lady at work today. She found out that I did fact and somebody sent her to me, and I was helping her and resourcing her and they're like, does that count for donating time to the city? And we're like, absolutely, that counts. Write it up, send it in, because that's how we were documenting all the work that regular everyday citizens were doing for victims and survivors on behalf of the city of San Antonio. And from what I heard, I don't know if he's been able to get it off the ground, but I heard that Sheriff Javier Salazar was gonna launch such a program, but for the county, at the county level. And so people do care. People want to do something. People want to see domestic violence end. People don't, and then the other cool thing is that so many of them were survivors themselves. Women who came out of it, women who helped their mom out of it, men who watched their moms get beaten all their lives and wanted to give and wanted to see this stop. I mean, just people from so many incredible stories of survival, giving to our city, donating to our city. Imagine the millions of dollars of volunteer hours given to our city by these people that want to see domestic violence end. This is why it's so important for us to be doing this work, because nobody wants to live like that. Victims don't want to live like that. Kids don't want to be raised in those kind of families. Perpetrators don't want to keep victimizing and abusing their families, but we have to work with them to teach them the alternatives. What are their options? What are their choices? And it's not up to us to tell them what to do either. It's up to us to make them aware of their alternatives and their options and their choices, and support them in a way that's not judgmental, but it's about self-determination and them making their choices on their own.
One of the things I'm curious about in the prevention, you guys have talked, and maybe this could have been in the segment where we were having our technical difficulties, but when we're talking about supporting the whole family, including the person committing the acts of violence, and removing some of those stressors that make it more likely, What are some of the unlikely supports that we need to be investing in as a community? What are some of the ancillary issues we need to be addressing, and what are some of the best efforts at getting that done?
Well, I will say that I mentioned earlier about the importance of changing conversation. We also need to change conversation around the concept of helping perpetrators, because I'll be honest, it is not a sexy thing. The last thing anyone wants to hear. Sorry?
I would imagine there's some pushback.
Oh, quite a bit. Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. There is an idea that because domestic violence is categorized as a, quote, violent offense, that the solution for domestic violence is to incarcerate. And at the misdemeanor level, the maximum amount that they can receive is 1 year in jail. In the meantime, the family waits for them, they get back out, and the whole system repeats itself. Or people think that there's going to be relief once they get the victim out of the house, then all of a sudden all the problems are solved. No, the individual does not remain single for the rest of their life. They get involved in another relationship. So I think there needs to be more investment in working with perpetrators. And the faith-based community is one of the best communities that can do that. There is certainly a lot of principles within the faith community that work well when it comes to redeeming and helping individuals to change behavior, helping them to find structure in their lives would definitely be something that would be worthwhile. Judge Diaz mentioned about evidence-based practices. We don't have evidence-based practices when working with perpetrators because, frankly, a lot of the resources in my community, my professional community, is dedicated towards finding empirical-based supports for the victims alone and the survivors. So we need to broaden our ideas around this. And someone just tweeted about preventative mental health care. It all starts with mental health. It all comes back to trauma. When you trace the roots of what's going on in our communities with respect to substance abuse and domestic violence, trauma is the source. And if we don't address the source, we are really just talking about the branches of the tree and we're not getting to the root.
And the thing that I'd like to point out is trauma includes corporal punishment as a form of discipline when raising our children. That is something that needs to stop. We need to quit hitting children as corporal punishment because it does not work. And it is those are the first traumatic experiences our children experience. And that's not getting tended to. People are not healing from that. And people are not getting the attention and the therapeutic and healing interventions that they need from the violence that they experienced as children. I've worked in the shelter, I've worked in the jail, I've done a little bit of work in prisons. And when I talk to inmates and to survivors, all of them talk about their first traumatic experiences being the violence that they experienced in their home of origin, in their family of origin. And that's why it was so fantastic that the San Antonio Area Foundation, gave to the city of San Antonio, all this money to invest in nonviolent parenting, for us to deliver nonviolent parenting education to the parents of this community. Because, so many people still believe in hitting as a form of discipline. And those are the very first seeds that we're planting in terms of trauma. And then it just goes from there. If they don't get help for what they experienced in childhood, that affects their teen years, their adult years, their relationships, and everything beyond that. And so, and speaking as a survivor of, corporal punishment growing up, it took me years of therapy to undo the impact of that experience as a child. And when I was almost like 40, my parents sat us down and apologized to us and told us they were sorry that they had hit us so much because they thought they were doing the right thing. And that my mom literally, she said, we were ignorant and we didn't know any better. We just did what was done to us. And but thank God, they were still able to show us how much they loved us too. And so, as I grew up, I was able to recognize I need to undo some of that stuff. And so I invested in therapy for myself so that I could be a better servant for my community. And but not everybody has those opportunities. Not everybody realizes those connections. Not everybody understands how all of that plays out. And that's why we've got to do that education for our parents to teach them another way, the alternatives to corporal punishment that are available to us, because they're very powerful, and they can be just as effective, more effective at creating well-adjusted, kids that are comfortable, secure, feel good in their skin, know who they are, and come with a powerful identity into their adulthood, because that's what we need. We don't need all these traumatized children coming into adulthood with all that pain and all that woundedness that then plays out in terms of domestic violence and child abuse when they become adults.
And can I add to that, Bekah? Just
Absolutely.
Sorry, have to brag on the commission for just a little bit here, and some of the things that Patricia mentioned. The collaborative commission was created a little over a year and a half ago. And what we have in this commission are the leaders in our community dealing with domestic violence. We have the chief and the sheriff that meet with us monthly and that are working on implementing a domestic violence high-risk team and a referral line. Yes, the Bexar County Sheriff's Office is working on doing that also. They're sitting at the table finding solutions to this. And thanks to Patricia and Marta Pelayas and Julia Rainey Rodriguez, they're also in charge of our nonprofit committee. Marta runs the shelter. Julia runs Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, and they've been working for a long time with our local law enforcement to improve training and get us to where we are today. We have our judges, we have our prosecutors, we have the heads of our healthcare institutions, of our universities, folks from the faith-based community. We have the leaders in our community finding solutions. So what are those ancillary issues as well, Bekah, that we're working on? Some of the specifics we're working on in the first year only. We're working to develop a more transparent referral process. So for individuals seeking assistance, it can be a challenge to find the right help that you need when you need it. And for folks that want to help them, to know where to direct them to help. So that's one of the things we're working on. A communications campaign to get the word out to our community about the resources that are available to them. So not only is there $3 million worth of volunteer hours out there, there's actually millions of dollars that the city has put forth to this effort, to all of these efforts to really make a difference. Expanding pro bono legal representation, access to attorneys, access to counsel, not just for victims, but for offenders too. Really, it's a problem if you only have representation on one side and not on the other. You're not going to get the impact that you need. We're working on getting firearms out of the hands of folks that we already know cannot possess them. 60% of people that are murdered in Texas by domestic violence are by firearms. And really, to kind of get back to where this all started, the primary focus of the commission is prevention. And prevention starts with education. And so there's a lot of money being invested into education at the school levels of parents, of children, and that's something that we're going to continue to work on, because that's the approach we need. We need to have a trauma-informed approach, understand that trauma does inform a lot of the work that we're doing and the domestic violence that we see. So I just wanted to address that question, Bekah, and tell everyone that yes, it's bad, but we are doing a lot to work on it as a community, and we're investing in this resources and brain power. And over time, we will see a difference be made. And we hope that everyone that's interested will come on board with us and work with us. There is space for everyone in this conversation. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, the Collaborative Commission on Domestic Violence. Please reach out to us if you want to get involved.
Yeah.
We have a question from Facebook I want to pull up. Are community agencies that work with victims and perpetrators like Family Violence Prevention Center and Vicente Sanchez at VENT included in that task team?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I have a question. Y'all have mentioned the importance of recovering from the wounds that you experience are often the driver. And one of the questions I've often had about when you see violence as an acceptable sometimes, because that's what you've always learned, whether it's discipline or smacking your, significant other when they deserve it, quote unquote, like opening that door. Once the door is open, we are all wounded people, and those wounds, there isn't really like a safe amount of. It's kind of when you're pregnant, the doctor will say there's no safe amount of alcohol. You hear like, oh, you can have a drink here, you can have a drink there, and the doctor's like, no, technically, there's not a safe amount of alcohol. Like there's no okay amount of violence for the people in your household. But often the cultural discourse is that, it's okay in certain situations, or there's, the family war of the time so-and-so lost their temper, and it's something that we don't react hugely to. But then you have wounded people in these situations, and so you guys have all talked about the fact that really what is opening up a lot of this, there's the discourse and how we talk about it and changing that, there's the resources, but then there's dealing with our woundedness. And so therapy is expensive. And I would love to, I've done some reporting on mental health care deserts. And San Antonio has certain segments of the city where it's really hard to get to counseling, psychiatric care. Wait lists are long. What can we do to increase, for one, to reduce the stigma of seeking out a therapist, and for two, to increase access for people who don't have the time wealth and half of therapists don't even take insurance anyway, but the insurance or the disposable income to do that. Some of it's not necessarily like diagnosed mental health,
Right.
or ordered, that kind of thing, but just the work we all need to do. Because like you said, this is such a widespread issue. It seems like so many people who don't think of themselves as mentally ill really would benefit from figuring out where those wounds and those weaknesses are.
I can speak on that just because I'm a licensed professional counselor and a licensed chemical dependency counselor, and I'm still actively seeing clients to this day. You're right. There is definitely a lack of resources, and it exists in 78207 and some of the other zip codes around the city where we have the highest level of domestic violence. One of the things that I think changes the conversation around help seeking, period, is to refrain from referring to counseling as something that is needed by people who are, quote, mentally ill. A lot of people will not identify with that language, but we can identify with language such as life is at best ambiguous. You can be doing everything right in this life and challenging things still happen. Look at the pandemic. Look at how many people are really struggling right now who've done nothing wrong. But life itself is challenging, and we all get tangled up. I like to think of therapy as a place where people can come to detangle And when we look at it from that perspective, I think people are more willing to find themselves in that kind of language. The other thing is there are definitely resources that are available, but I think our community is not well versed in how to access them. I would encourage anyone who's listening to this podcast to go to www.auntbertha.com. Anytime you're looking for any kind of resource in our community, that is the most updated website for finding resources. All you have to do is type in your zip code and you will find a resource for everything, whether it's food, clothing, closet, eyeglasses, counseling, detox services, outpatient, inpatient, anything that you need, you will find it there. At the University of Texas at San Antonio, I am also the clinic director for the Sarabia Family Counseling Center. We are currently providing free telehealth services for Bexar County. We do not charge for the services, and the services are being done virtually at the present time. So anyone who is interested in our services, you can email us at sfcc.utsa@gmail.com. We are closed at the present time because of the holiday, but come January, once we resume, we are year-round services and people can see us for as long as they want. You do not have to have insurance and you do not have to pay for the clinical services that you receive. And I have tons of counselors. I'm sorry?
Will you say the email address again so that we can put it up on the banner so people
Sure. sfcc.utsa@gmail.com. Awesome. And if you look at the website that's up there right now, findhelp.org, that's Aunt Bertha's website link. You can also find other counseling services that are available. Counseling is accessible, but if you don't know where to go, a lot of times people don't know who to ask. And so it's a great opportunity for me to represent my professional community and let you all know those services are available. And counseling does not mean that you are crazy. We all get tangled up. We all need people to talk to. And I tell my counseling students that I teach at the university, counselors with counselors make good counselors. So trust, believe, even I talk to someone. And that's the healthiest thing that we can do for ourselves. And the best, if you want to learn how to be a good parent, the best way to be a good parent is be a healthy parent. When you are healthy, that makes your kids healthier. So take time for yourself and stop making excuses.
I was just listening to a podcast and they were talking about protecting the asset. Like if you're a parent, you are an asset to your child. So you got to guard the asset, cultivate the asset.
Mm-hmm.
I think as a lot of parents and partners feel guilty taking care. I mean, there's especially women. They just feel really guilty taking care of themselves. And it feels like it's like manicures and pedicures, me time. And I remember being a young mom and being so torn up by all of the things people were telling me were the most important thing to do for my baby, whether it was breastfeeding or getting them on a sleep schedule. And I remember like feeling that frayed feeling where like it's dangerous. It's that dangerous feeling of like I'm starting to lose my ability to regulate here and thinking I think the best thing I can do for my kid is to give her a sane mommy, and all of the sleep schedules and this stuff is pushing me dangerously to the edge. And there was a great counselor involved, and also just that permission to say I can't do her any good if in fact I might do harm. And I think that though that's the same thing as a partner looking and going, I can't give you the love and the care and the support that you need if I'm not if I don't have anything to give. And so I think that that's just such a good word, especially in the holidays. Oh my gosh. All of my bad parenting, all of my bad partnering, all of my most lost tempers are around the holidays. And so, because it's that togetherness, like you guys, like with the pandemic, togetherness just breeds short fuses.
It does, Bekah, and we see, this is a challenging time. It's a challenging time when we do tend to see increases of domestic violence around the holidays as well. So it's even more important now than ever to reach out to our loved ones, our sisters, our brothers, our family and friends, and check on them. Because whether we know it or not, every one of us works with, is friends with, is neighbors with someone that is living in a household with domestic violence. So it's really important to use this opportunity to reach out, to check in on people, tell them that they're loved, and so I hope we can all keep that in mind. And then to your point about what's good for mom, what's good for baby, what's good for your kids. When we're talking about mental health and counseling, it's important to remember that if you have experienced domestic violence, if you've been in a household where there's been trauma and there are children there that have experienced that, absolutely, please take care of yourself and talk to someone, and don't be afraid to do so, but also don't forget about those kids, because they are taking in everything that they hear, everything that they see, and we can stop the cycle of domestic violence if we can recognize early on that trauma has an impact on those kids. Whether you see it now or not, it will have an impact on those kids long term. And there's counseling for families. On the civil side, one of the things we do so much in these types of cases is it is court ordered, and we'll order counseling for the victim, for the perpetrator, and the kids. There's family counseling that you can do to try to reunify a family when it's practical, and when it's not, to at least address those issues with your children early on and hopefully set them up for greater success and a healthier future. So it's really important to have that conversation as well.
Thank you so much for that. And I want to give one last call out to anybody watching, to ask your questions on Facebook, or YouTube. Yeah, I think Patricia, we can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Can I unmute
Yeah,
myself?
there you go.
What I wanted to say about all that is, oftentimes when one of our family members is in an abusive relationship, we cut them off. And especially if they don't do what we tell them. Like, you take a kind of a stance that I told her to leave him, I don't know how many times, and she's still there, and so you're mad at this person. And I mean, it's not that you're mad, it's that you're hurting for them, right? But it comes across as mad. And so we take that stance of, staying mad at them and don't talk to them. But that's like the worst thing we can do for them. That is, it's like handing them over on a silver platter to the situation of abuse and violence. And so what we really need to do is we really need to, move away from our stance of, trying to tell people what to do, because, you could be telling them to go be murdered, because people do get murdered most of the time when they're in the process of ending an abusive relationship. That's why the safety plan is so important. And so, what we need to be is a source of support, a source of a listener. We need to be non-judgmental, and we need to ask, how can I help you? And we need to trust that survivor is the expert in her life. She knows her situation masterfully. She knows exactly what she's up against. She knows what that person is like. She knows what they're capable of. And we need to listen to them, and we need to believe them. And then we need to ask, how can I be of help? What can I do for you that will matter? And stand back and listen, and then try to be a source of help that way. because, you know, it's the worst thing we can do is to be telling them what to do and telling them, you know, to leave, because that is the most dangerous time. And you can't just up and walk out by yourself without thinking things through. You got to plan, you got to think things through. And, you know, it's so common, you know, to hear that I told her to leave. She should have left a long time ago. And it's like, no, 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 that's not the way. And, you know, and then to try to help people understand that, you know, that we have to, you know, offer ourselves non-judgmentally, unconditionally as a source of help, and then step back and let them tell you what would be helpful to them at that time.
And if I could just really, I'm sorry, Bekah, I just want to
go ahead.
To say also, when you're listening to them, you'll often hear, sometimes you'll hear that there's certain barriers to them leaving. A safety plan, what Patricia mentioned, is one of the most important things that you can do, is to make a plan for how you can leave in a safe way. And every barrier that you can think of, whether it's housing, having to take, you know, what are they going to do with their children? What are they going to do with their pets? How are they going to pay their bills? There are people in our community that can help. And I want to plug one great resource that we have, where Patricia used to work as well, as Family Violence Prevention Services. It's our local battered women and children's shelter. Every service that we have mentioned, they provide for free. It's not just a shelter. But if you do need shelter housing services, you can take your pets with you now too. So, and you can also call them to make a safety plan. You can even call SAPD, the non-emergency number, and making a safety plan is a very specific thing. And there are people that will walk you through it to help you make one that's personalized to you. So listen, and then if they're willing to accept information, give them those resources as well.
This is so good. And we have 2 more questions from Facebook, and then I have a final one for us. Historically, people of color have not been treated ethically by the mental health community. We carry this mistrust in our DNA. Patricia is part of the community, which is why she is so effective. Do you feel it is important to be part of the community, and why? That is an excellent question.
It is. And well, the other thing that is important about my presence in all of this work is that I've been at it for 41 years. And so that's why so many people know of me and know of the work that I've done for the whole issue of domestic violence. But being able to see myself in the people I serve is of utmost importance to me. I come from that way of thinking of I am you and you are I. And so whatever harm gets done to you is a harm that is happening to me as well. And so that is my basis for serving community. And I think that that is part of why, you know, I have been able to be effective in terms of being able to connect with, you know, average everyday folks. My friend Debbie Tucker used to say, from the house coat to the mink coat, right? You know, and working with people, you know, everywhere in between, from the house coat to the mink coat. And that's how we have to be. You know, we have to be able to connect with people from all walks of life, because this stuff happens to people from all walks of life. And, you know, that's the other thing, is that this stuff cuts across all the barriers. You know, some people think that it's only poor people or brown people or black people or only certain sides of town. But in reality, this stuff is equally spread out everywhere. And that's another thing that I think it continues to be a myth, right? That it only happens to certain people. And that's simply not true. And we need to begin to understand that this could happen to me, to you, to any of us, right? And so that's why it's so important that our work is genuine, that our work is non-judgmental, and that our work is, comes from our heart and from our spirit. Because a survivor, if they can detect that you're not genuine, they will blow you off so fast. And they can detect you. That's the other thing, is that when you're not for real, they know.
Well,
And
it's a life
and
and
you're not going to be effective.
Yep. Let me grab that one last. There we go. What are your thoughts on decolonizing mental health and domestic violence to be able to better reach and serve people of color in our community? So this kind of builds on that. And we could probably talk about this all night. So
Really,
it might be this might be a follow-up edition of pub theology, but let's pull it tight into that question to say what are we doing in particular to make sure that the systemic issues that we are seeing in every field, in every part of our community, aren't creeping into the way we're asking people to deal with this stuff.
Well, I think I really like the way Stacey and Rosie in their class, they bring us in to talk to their students, who are going to go into all kinds of helping professions. And they ask us to come there and to be honest and to tell them, what this is like. Because, it's all nice and lovely when you think you can just go set up your little office and hang out your little shingle and, with your PhD next to it, and everybody's going to flock to you, right? And so it doesn't work like that. You have to have relationships in the community. You have to be a part of the community. You have to contribute to community. You have to, live in community, and people have to know you in community. And, for them to have what we call confianza, right? It kind of translates to trust, but it's deeper than that, right? In Spanish, it's confianza, right? And that's what we need to have from them in order for us to have an effective working relationship. That has to be established from the get-go. And then, we have to recognize all the other intersections of racism and classism and elitism and, all of those things that are out there that, also play a part of the work that we do. Like I often tell the men that I work with, the system is set up to make you fail. The system is set up for you to end up in jail. And what you have to realize is that you don't need to play into that system. You can make a choice to be different. You can make a choice to just kind of step around all of that and choose to be different and not, fall into that trap of the pathway to prison, because your behavior, all these other men might be telling you you're doing good and you got to keep her in her place and you got to shut her up and you got to show her who's boss. And that sounds good, but that's the perfect setup to put you on that pathway to prison. And you can fall into that trap, but you can also say, I'm not going to play that game, and choose to be different and choose to communicate with your partner and in a way that's, about respect. Now that's hard work. That shows that you're a man. If you can solve problems with your partner by talking and dialogue and mutual respect, those are signs of what it means to be masculine, and male, right? And because anybody can beat the crap out of somebody. That's easy, and you're falling right into the path of the oppressor. The oppressor wants you to do that because then they have total control over your life and every aspect of your life. And so, when I talk to the men, that's how I talk to them. Because I want them to know, what they're up against and how they can choose to be different.
Yeah. Monique and Stacey, do either of y'all have something on that?
I do believe that it is important that we decolonize mental health, because if you look at the historical framework of mental health, it was rooted in a lot of very oppressive language. The term hysteria actually came from hysterectomy. So there was obviously some issues with respect to women when we look at the diagnostic criteria, the term drapetomania that we're all familiar with, which was in our first DSM, which referred to slaves who tried to leave the slave owners. When we look at gender dysphoria and how gender identity disorder was historically pathologized for trans-identifying people. And I say that because mental health, like a lot of professions, was essentially created with language that did not support vulnerable communities. And so visibility does matter. And one of the things I'm very proud of is to see judges of color, particularly female judges of color, who are sitting on the bench like Judge Diaz. When I see women in the community like Patricia Castillo, when you see people who look like you that are providing the services that you need, visibility matters, because it is true. We can sometimes, coming from a Western European culture when it comes to the medical model and medical practices, and even our evidence-based practices that are rooted in federal funds that come from Westernized theories, we can all come from a framework that does not support collectivist communities. And so when you talk about domestic violence, when you talk about matriarchal families, a woman who's holding the family together and you tell her that the best thing for her to do is to leave, that's a very complicated conversation. So in the mental health community, we do not have the right to impose our values on other people. We have to enter the situation, like Patricia was saying earlier, that the client is the true expert of their life. And we are there really as a fellow traveler, there to support them. That just because their, quote, life or choices in life make me uncomfortable, it does not give me a right as a clinician to impose what is right for that family, what is right for that individual, but merely to support them and help them to find the resources that they need as an informed consumer of my services.
Awesome. Okay, I want to be mindful of the time that we told all three of you that we would be done, and end with one last round of questions, and I'll ask each of you to keep it very kind of lightning round. Point us in, and we've talked about this throughout, but leave us with one place, one volunteer opportunity, where someone who's maybe wanting to give some holiday time or is going to commit in the new year to get involved in this. Where's the first place your ordinary San Antonian should go to volunteer? And the second, the most effective thing a person could say to someone in their family over the holidays, let's say, who comes to them. Just remind us of the most effective thing, if we can remember nothing else in the moment when we find out that if someone we love is being affected by this, what do we need to say? So those two things. Where do we go to volunteer? And should any of our loved ones come forward with this soon, help us burn it into our brains, so that, because in those moments, your brain goes blank. So help us out. And let's start with Monique, and we'll go counterclockwise back around and end with Patricia.
Certainly. The first one is a little bit more challenging of a question for me, in part because I'm a judge and I can't really endorse any one particular organization over anything else. But so I'm going to give a little bit of a different answer and say you can volunteer and really make an impact by educating yourself and taking some time to learn more about domestic violence so you can better help those in your life. Secondly, when you see someone in that type of a situation, I think it's really important to let them know that they're not alone, that this happens to the best of us, and that there are resources out there to help them. And let me know if you want me to give that to you. Don't impose that upon them, but ask them if you can help them, if they're okay with that. So emphasizing that they're not alone and that there's help out there for every issue that they bring up, I think is really critical.
Stacey, how about you?
The two organizations I would recommend you volunteer for, number one is the Peace Initiative, where they have a badass woman who's running it. The other one would be Mission 360 with John Bekah, who works with perpetrators.
Nice.
What would I say to a family member? What is something that you can say? Judge Diaz said it really well about that there is help and you are not alone. I would also add that survivors of domestic violence are extremely courageous. So what I would say to someone is, you are so courageous for coming forward, and I am here to support you. And they are doing the tough work just by coming forward and being authentic. So when someone tells you what's going on, honor that space for them and encourage them.
Awesome. Patricia, bring us home.
Muted.
There we go.
Thank you. We need the support of men. The vast majority of men are not violent, are not hurting people they love. The vast majority of them, like 75% of them, are not doing that. And so this is an issue that affects everybody. It's not a woman's issue. This is a community issue. This is a social justice issue. And we need men to mentor boys, to be a role model and an example for boys. We need them to have healthy, respectful, loving relationships with boys and teach them about what it means to be a good man. And, we have a lot of like well-meaning men who they're not violent and they're good guys and they, respect people and everything. But if they see one of their buddies being violent toward their partner, they don't say anything. They just keep quiet and assume it's none of their business. And what I'm inviting those men to do is to quit being that well-meaning man and be that man who really needs to speak up and say, that's not right. And you need to not do that. Or that's disrespectful. Or I wish I wouldn't have seen you do that. Say something, speak up, because men listen to other men. And so I'm inviting people to please say something, speak up, don't stay silent. We need you to step up to the plate, because this is, killing our families. And if we don't do something about it, we're going to do ourselves in this way. If coronavirus doesn't get us first. And so volunteer to do that work, volunteer to step up to the plate that way. Because we need you so much and so badly. Okay. And in terms of if a family member were experiencing this, I too would say, I am so sorry this happened to you. I'm so sorry, this person chose to act this way towards you. But you deserve better. You deserve respect. You deserve to be loved. And whatever I can do to be of help, please just tell me. I will help you. And if you don't want my help right now, that's okay. You tell me when it's the time for me to help you. If it's better for me to just step back and butt out because that's the safest thing for you, that's what I'll do. But, just let them know the door is always open. I'm here for you whenever you're ready. Okay. And let it be on their timeline, work on their timeline, work on what they need and what they ask for, and honor their right to self-determination.
That's so wonderful. And thank you all three of you for everything tonight. Monique, I'm going to ask if you would do us the honor of a closing statement. just to take you back to your workday life. But no, kind of offering us a good word to end on, and especially as we go into the holidays, as we're dealing with coronavirus, and as we want to keep this issue on our minds.
Thank you for the opportunity. I want us to all remember that none of us are alone in what we're all experiencing right now. We are all going through extremely challenging times, and what that means is that we all have something in common right now. And we now more than ever is a wonderful time to reach out to your loved ones, even if it's been a while. Reach out to them, tell them you love them, ask them how they're doing, and don't be afraid to share your struggles with one another. It's cathartic. It'll open up other conversations that might lead to discovering that someone that you know is in need of help. Sometimes it just takes being vulnerable, being honest with one another. That's okay. It's a good thing. And there's no better time than during the holidays to reach out and start having those conversations with people. And each one of you, I said earlier, may know someone, likely does know someone that's living with domestic violence, but that also means each one of you can do something to help at least one person at a time overcome those situations and get out of an abusive relationship. So you all have the power. You don't have to change it all. You can do it one friend, one family member at a time.
Thank you guys so much. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and watched. Please see the comment section for more of those resources. We're going to keep those. Those will be up if you want to share them with folks. And by all means, please take this good advice and go tell your people you love them. Thank you everybody so much. Thank you, ladies, for being with us.